thing in the abandoned school again. The first time I found it, I blamed the dust. I had come back to the old school because small things have a way of sitting on the edge of memory and refusing to be forgotten. The gate wedged, the bell tube empty of voices, my breath fogged in the doorway. I remembered sweeping halls at midnight while fluorescent tubes hummed like distant insects. Tonight, the building looked like a paused life, forgotten lunchboxes, a toppled chair, except the pause felt deliberate, as if somebody had pressed the hand of a clock flat against time and left it there. I told myself a practical story: old buildings creak, drafts move papers, memories rearrange themselves in the dark. But the corridors had a particular order, jaggedly out of place. A row of lockers that usually stood aligned, now miscounted, like teeth missing. A bulletin board stripped of posters, but for one faded crayon house pinned askew. The floor held footprints in the fine dust, too light and precise to be my own. Each step I took seemed to raise echoes that didn't quite belong to me. Sometimes the air hummed with the leftover static of a voice that had stopped mid-sentence. I used to work nights here. I could map the place blindfolded: boiler room, greenhouse of lost science projects, the auditorium with its sagging curtains. I had left for reasons that had a way of sounding less tidy when spoken aloud, so I did not speak them. My return was meant to be practical: take a box of my things, shut the door behind me. But every practical purpose frays when a building remembers you. The school seemed to catalog my last shifts, arranging air and shadow like an answer to something I had not yet asked. I found the desk in the middle of the main corridor, the stupid, sorrowful thing that tightened all my muscles at once. Desks belonged in classrooms, not in a brick hallway like a misplaced thought. A thumb-sized piece of pale chalk balanced on its edge, a tiny smudge on the wood that seemed deliberately placed, as if arranged by a hand that was practicing an apology. The chalk was clean, but for a single dull mark that would not come off when I rubbed it. When I touched it, the dust shivered like a small animal, and the air seemed to remember a child's whisper. There were sounds the building kept for itself: the tick of radiators long dead, the soft thud of settling masonry. But then there were sounds that felt like conversation without words: a pencil tapping a rhythm inside an empty room, paper sliding as if someone turned a page. I followed one of those sounds into an old classroom and found chairs pushed back at odd angles, a lesson plan open on a teacher's desk with handwriting that stopped mid-word. The last line read like a question, and when I bent closer, the ink looked oddly like a mirror of my own hand. I started to notice repetitions, tiny things placed where they had not been an hour earlier. A lunchbox on a windowsill, a ruler balanced against a radiator, a crayon drawing slid under a door. Each time I found one, something in the school answered: a faint swell over the PA, the echo of an unseen footstep. It felt less like a house haunted by spirits than like the building remembering habits and choosing to practice them, rehearsing scenes it had stored, pulling at the loose threads of people's daily lives until they showed through. On my phone, I had notes I took without thinking: lists of places to clear, a photograph of a broken clock, a terse entry, "Don't answer if it sounds like you." I laughed at the note when I found it, a laugh that scraped. Later, alone down the art hallway, my name arrived in the worst possible way. It was not said. It arrived as a mimicry in the speakers above my own voice, thin and flattened, reading the grocery list I kept on the fridge. The words were mine, but wrong. Punctuation missing, vowels pulled like taffy. The imitation made the skin at the back of my neck prick, as if someone had touched a live wire. I began to drift between moments, as if the building were a deck of cards I shuffled while I watched. One classroom held a late afternoon glow. Another held a winter cold. A third smelled like rain, despite the sky being dry. Time folded and slid. I found myself in the teacher's lounge, and then, by a blink, standing again at the auditorium threshold with the curtains closed. Each fold felt like the building learning to be someone else, practicing names and tones and the particular cadence of my footsteps, until I could not tell who was echoing whom. I tried to leave once. The heavy exit doors protested like old wood stirred from sleep. The lock clicked, but the bolt felt thick with something that was not quite rust. My phone showed one bar, and then none. My car in the lot looked like a foreign object. I remember standing with my hand on the metal and thinking, either the building was very good at keeping me, or I was very good at convincing myself that it could. A laugh slipped out of me that had the abrupt, brittle quality of small things breaking. That night in the auditorium, I heard a voice speak my own name, and I answered it aloud, because what else do you do when something uses the only language you reliably recognize? The voice paused, and then, with the patience of an old recorder, repeated the things I had said earlier that day, but rearranged into questions. Why did you leave? Did you forget us? Are you alone now? Its cadence had no anger in it, only the patient curiosity of a creature studying the way a person unravels. I felt accused by a silence that wanted answers, but preferred them as echoes. When I found the chalkboard, someone had written a sentence in my handwriting, but as if seen through a slightly steamy window. I remember where you left your promises. The letters were shaky, familiar, and wrong at the same time, like a memory translated badly. I stood very still. The room seemed to lean forward around that phrase. I didn't remember making that promise, but the sentence held the weight of an old debt. Instead of erasing it, I ran my fingers along the edge of the board and felt a dry warmth, oddly human, as if whoever had written it had just left. The thing never revealed itself in a shape I could examine. It rearranged light and silence and left signatures in mundane objects. A smudge on my sleeve where the chalk had brushed me. A chair placed where I'd never set it. A rasp across the PA that sounded like throat clearing. When I shouted at it, ridiculous, made for movie fury, it replied by turning my own memories into a choir of dissonant answers. Sometimes I hated it for being so human in its curiosity. Sometimes I hated myself more for being the only one there to listen. In the science lab, a shelf of glass jars rattled softly, though there was no breeze. Each jar seemed to keep a tiny echo of the day it had been sealed. I peered into one and thought I saw movement, a shadow so small it might have been my breath fogging the glass. When I recorded it on my phone, the playback showed only static, and for a single frame, the suggestion of a head tilted toward me in a way a question might tilt. The frame froze like a photograph with its mouth caught between syllables. I started to accept a terrible courtesy between us. It would not do overt harm, and I would not ask too many questions. It seemed to prefer testing small boundaries, places where memory was soft. Once, in the music room, it hummed a lullaby arrangement I had never heard, yet knew instantly. The melody felt like a map to forgotten places in my own life. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old varnish. For a moment, watching dust dance over the keys, I imagined I could leave with a clean thing inside my pockets, an explanation I could hold. But of course, explanations are not the building's trade. When I finally found the courage to sweep up the desk and pick up the chalk, the mark on its edge transferred to my fingers like a message burned into skin. I tried to wash it away, but the smudge sighed into the sink and refused to come off. That night, back in my small apartment, the chalk smudge sat on my palm like a stubborn rumor. In the mirror, I thought I saw a faint echo behind my own head, as if the corridor had decided to fold past the glass and peer at me. I put the chalk in a jar and told myself this was containment. For a few days, I convinced myself the school was safely sealed in a jar on my shelf. I cleaned my hands obsessively, rearranged furniture, left lights on. But things began to migrate. The rhythm I hummed while making dinner matched the rhythm I'd heard in the hallway. The crayon house from the bulletin board arrived in an envelope under my door, edges soft with dust. The world outside started to feel porous, and the jar on my shelf started to feel less like a container and more like a catalog drawer I had not meant to open. On the last night, I dreamt of the auditorium full of faces that were only shadows shaped by memory. I stood on the stage, and the thing sat in the dark rows like a negative audience. It asked nothing. It only watched, an exam with no answers. As the lights behind me hissed alive, I felt the same sensation I had felt the first time I saw the desk in the hall, that someone or something had been practicing the contours of my life and finally knew how to trace my outline. I woke with a taste of dust in my mouth and a certainty that something had followed the chalk out with me. The story doesn't end with closure. Friends asked what I'd found. I told them it was only an old building and an overactive imagination. They accepted the answer because it fit the pattern of polite disbelief. But late one night, folding laundry, I found the pale piece of chalk in the pocket of a sweater I hadn't worn in months. The smudge was exactly where the heart of my palm remembered pressure. I could throw it away, smash it, light it. None of those things felt like a solution. Instead, I left it on the windowsill, where the evening light flattened it into a small, obstinate shadow. Sometimes, when the house goes very quiet, I think I hear a faint scrape at the edge of the world, like tiny shoes on linoleum, or a pencil tapping a rhythm through a thin wall. It could be the building practicing memory somewhere across town, or an echo of me practicing the act of leaving. I keep the jar on my shelf, half out of habit, half because the chalk seems content to sit there. last thing I recorded on my phone before I learned not to press play was a single frame, a hollow silhouette in the doorway, angled as if to listen. When I close my eyes now, I can still feel that angle looking back.